I want to welcome our viewers and grand jurors back to the 12th session of the Citizens Grand Jury with our prosecutor, Larry Klayman. Larry, we've got a lot of testimony to get to today. Please take it away.
Yes, we do. And John Cullen's going to be back with yet more groundbreaking information for the Citizens Grand Jury with regard to the indictment of Dr. Anthony Fauci. We'll be presenting the preliminary findings to you again, and please fill them out and send them back to us because, yes, we are proceeding with Fauci's indictment. It's quite substantial. But we're also going to begin the process of indicting Representative Ilhan Omar. Let me give you the history of this. Going back several years at the beginning of the Trump administration, it became known that Ilhan Omar had engaged in immigration fraud with regard to marrying her own brother, with regard to getting immigration status in this country. She's also reportedly committed tax fraud and also fraud under the federal election laws in funneling money to her boyfriend and now husband from her campaign accounts. This is a very, very dangerous woman, someone who has whipped up tremendous anti-Semitism and by definition, anti-Christian reaction in this country. Jews have been beaten up on the streets of Beverly Hills and elsewhere throughout the United States. She is fomenting this anti-Semitism, and recently she made remarks equating the United States to Hamas as well as the Jewish state Israel. She's not being indicted for her comments about Jews. I mean, she's obviously able to exercise First Amendment rights, although we did file this petition with the Immigration and Naturalization Service, which is part of the Department of Homeland Security several years ago. It was during the Trump administration, and we asked for an investigation, and we asked for her deportation from this country, as well as ultimately a referral to the Justice Department for the crimes that she had committed. People like Ilhan Omar need to be peacefully and legally eliminated, not just from our body politic, but from this country as a whole. They have no basis being here. She's illegitimate. She should not be a citizen, and that should be revoked. And that would be one issue that we deal with. Her soul sister, Rashida Tlaib, who is equally as vile as she is in terms of being an anti-Semite, anti-Christian, anti-white, you name it. She assaulted my client, Laura Loomer, years ago. We did bring a lawsuit. The federal judge dismissed the case. But the fact is, these two are very, very toxic. And Tlaib has also committed crimes, and we will be proceeding with an indictment against her too in a later session. But let me have Jason show you this complaint. We're going to send it to you. And the tragedy is, the sad part is that the Department of Homeland Security, the immigration section, sat on this even during Trump's administration, did nothing. We then even filed a case in federal court to force that action. That action did not occur. And President Trump himself, knew of this. He could have directed action, but he didn't. I think he was, again, getting bad advice from the Republican establishment that told him that they would call him a racist, but that has nothing to do with being a racist, to hold people accountable under the rule of law. And in fact, it's racist to not proceed with legal remedies with regard to people like Ilhan Omar, who are whipping up hatred, anti-Semitism, anti-Christian belief and actions in our country. Again, she's entitled, at least for the time being, given the fact that she's, at least for the moment, a citizen, she's entitled to her First Amendment rights, but she's not entitled to commit immigration fraud, tax fraud, and federal election commission fraud. She needs to be held accountable. No one else will do it except this Citizens Grand Jury, which is being sponsored by Freedom Watch. So Jason, if you can go over some of these materials, we will send them to the grand jurors, and we will then take this issue up again during the next session next Thursday.
Absolutely, Larry. Would you like me to read the complaint, or you've got excerpts from the petition?
Go ahead and read the salient portions, because they're going to see the whole petition, and we're going to leave the rest of the time for John Cullen to finish up on the Fauci indictment. But I just want to give an introduction so the grand jurors know what they're going to get and what's going to be discussed in greater detail during the next session, the 13th session of our Citizens Grand Jury next Thursday.
Absolutely. So this is taken from the petition statement of facts. 1. On information and belief, Ms. Omar has committed marriage fraud under Section 8 U.S. Code, 8 U.S.C. Section 1325 and 18 U.S.C. Section 1546A. The Immigration Marriage Fraud Amendments Act of 1986 provides a penalty of 5 years imprisonment and $250,000 fine for any individual who knowingly enters into a marriage for the purpose of evading any provision of the immigration laws. 2. On information and belief, Ms. Omar's own citizenship status may have been invalid due to these circumstances or related events. The circumstances of Ms. Omar acquiring U.S. citizenship remain murky in public reports.
By the way, let me just interrupt here. At the time that this petition was prepared, which is good, it's going back 3-4 years ago. That's why it's on information and belief. Now it's not even in dispute. Everybody knows that she committed immigration fraud and married her brother, as well as the other allegations. So I just wanted to show you this because it lays out the law, but it also is a testament to the deep state in the executive branch, which even includes what happened during the Trump administration, and how we have no justice system in this country, and how certain people are above the law, and how certain minorities are using that as an excuse not to be held accountable like the rest of if you all would be held accountable under similar circumstances. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah. On information and belief, Ms. Omar was not eligible for naturalization, including because she was already living safely in the resort city of Mombasa, Kenya, famous for its magnificent beaches on the Indian Ocean and a magnet for wealthy tourists from Europe and around the world. Kenya itself, though not utopia, is a relatively prosperous country due to its tourism economy, with a building boom in Nairobi funded largely by Chinese investors. Kenya has a relatively small, stable political system, even though Kenya's democracy is limited and elections not always ideal. It is a relatively secure and safe nation, driven by the government's desire to attract tourism. Because Omar's family was living safely in Mombasa, Kenya, she was not eligible to be admitted into the United States as a refugee. She was safe in a country near to her home country and not eligible for entry into the United States on the other side of the planet. 7. She may have also been admitted under temporary protected status, TPS, which would not lead to citizenship. 8. Therefore, on information and belief, Ms. Omar was not eligible for naturalization as a U.S. citizen because she was not legally and properly eligible to be a refugee. Based on the circumstances, it appears certain that Ms. Omar's application for refugee status, being already safe in Kenya at the time, contained false statements making her refugee status fraudulent. It is clear that false statements or false information provided in support of Ilhan Omar's refugee application, even by her parents, would invalidate not only her application for refugee status, but also her naturalization as a citizen. In order to claim refugee status in the United States when already residing in a safe country, it is nearly certain that Omar's refugee application contains false statements and or false information about facing fear or persecution when already living in safety in a beach resort community that attracts tourists from around the European and Asian regions. On information and belief, if Ilhan Omar were convicted of marriage fraud, the criminal conviction may be grounds for denaturalization and the loss of citizenship of not only her brother, Ahmed Nur Syed Elmi, but also Ilhan Omar herself. On information and belief, if Ilhan Omar joined organizations that provide support to terrorism, that makes her ineligible for refugee status within 5 years after naturalization. As a result of joining an organization that supports terrorism, even after obtaining citizenship within 5 years thereof, her citizenship could be revoked. Support for international terrorism has been one of the clearest and most frequent reasons in recent years for the revocation of citizenship denaturalization. Even if the proceeding is brought longer than 5 years after citizenship, if membership in a group such as a terrorist group began less than 5 years after naturalization, her citizenship can be revoked. The recently elected Attorney General of Minnesota, at the time of this writing, Keith Ellison, may fail to investigate or act upon these facts because he was elected with Democrat Party support in spite of credible evidence of committing sexual assault and his positioning as a Muslim Democrat. In 2015 and 2016, Omar interceded for a group of 6 Somalis from Minneapolis caught at the Mexican border on their way to fight for ISIS in Iraq and Syria. As the case went to trial the following year, the then state representative wrote a letter to the trial judge requesting compassion and lighter sentencing on behalf of one of the Minnesota men who was facing 30 years of jail time. Holly McKay, How Minneapolis Somali Community Became the Terrorist Recruitment Capital of the U.S. This article is reproduced courtesy of Fox News. More men and boys from Somali American community in Minneapolis have joined or attempted to join a foreign terrorist organization over the last 12 years than any other jurisdiction in the country. FBI statistics show that 45 Somalis left to join the ranks of either the Somalia-based Islamic insurgency Al-Shabaab or the Iraq and Syria-based ISIS combined. And as of 2018, a dozen more had been arrested with the intention of leaving to support ISIS. Both numbers are far higher than those of alleged terrorist wannabes who left or attempted to leave the country from other areas in the country where Muslim refugees have been resettled. In the case of the Somalis, it's no longer just the men. Earlier last year, a female was apprehended by authorities on charges of providing material support to Al-Qaeda and arson. With by far the largest Somali American population in the United States, estimates of up to 100,000, the insular ethnic community in Minnesota offers a rich recruiting ground. Investigators told Fox News that early on, Al-Shabaab recruiting was almost exclusively word of mouth. One family connection to a contact in the terrorist group would be pulled in as a recruit in the process that was repeated as the ranks of the Al-Shabaab grew. Ms. Ilhan Omar has recently become known as an overt anti-Semite elected to Congress in November of 2018. She is a supporter of the illegal boycott, divestment, and sanction movement, which, in violation of Anti-Boycott Act, seeks to strangle Israel economically. She announced on Twitter, "Israel has hypnotized the world. May Allah awaken people and help them see evil doings of Israel." Omar faced massive backlash after she stated on February 10th, 2019, that American support for Israel is bought by campaign donations from the American Israel Public Affairs Committee rather than a sincere and genuine alliance of shared values, goals, and interests between Israel and the United States of America, which benefits the United States, and a keen historical understanding that Israel's enemies are the United States' sworn and mortal enemies, regularly chanting "Death to America" in organized national demonstrations. Omar knowingly supports, endorses, and encourages violent enemies of the United States who are sworn, bound by oath and religious mandate, and determined to kill as many U.S. citizens as possible and to do as much harm to the United States as possible. This overt support of our country's enemies cannot be dismissed as naivete. As Winston Churchill reportedly warned Neville Chamberlain, "You might not be interested in war, but war might be interested in you." The laws on the books are there to defend the United States against its enemies. Even as late as yesterday, Hamas TV in the Palestinian territories was still airing incitement to war against Israel, telling Palestinians to scatter the enemy's body parts, make the skulls fly in the sky. Hamas Al-Aqsa TV, which Israel officially deemed a terrorist organization earlier this month, aired a music video calling for the resumption of suicide bombings and for Palestinians to stab, bomb, and make eyes weep, according to the translation by Palestinian Media Watch, which first reported on the video.
Let me stop you here, Jason.
Sure.
I think what we see here, and you're going several years back. I mean, this was at the beginning of the Trump administration. Nothing's changed. It's gotten worse. So grand jurors, read this. We're going to send it to you. We'll pick this up in the next session. But clearly, we have to do something here. This woman should be, frankly, indicted, and consequently, she should be expelled from this country. That is our goal. And it's time that somebody put their foot down. And not just her, but there are others like her. And we'll get to them as well. Right now, I want to turn it over to John Cullen. He's going to pick up on the testimony that he had provided earlier, very compelling testimony with regard to the indictment of Dr. Anthony Fauci and, of course, the communist Chinese, and he has more information to add. Go ahead, John.
Okay. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, grand jurors. Jason, if you can bring up that document that I sent you, the PDF document, that would be great. That's it. All right. So all of the data that you're about to see is coming directly from the CDC's website. This is the Center for Disease Control and Prevention in the United States. All the statistics you're going to see are for United States only, unless I tell you that it's not the case. And this is where they provide the most recent updates and the most recent data. If you go down a little bit more, Jason, to the middle of that page, you guys will see it says list of topics, and they have age and sex, place of death, and comorbidities. And we're going to be focusing on age and sex and comorbidities. So the first one and the fourth one. Okay. If we zoom out and go to the next slide, you'll see that for each one of these sections, they provide you, maybe zoom out a little bit more so they can, there you go. So they provide you with a whole bunch of data, but then in the descriptive paragraph at the top, there's a couple of buttons. They say, click here to download. And what I do is I click on those buttons and I download the data that you see in the table on the screen below. So the stuff that you see on the screen, I want to bring it into a spreadsheet program so that I can do some stuff with it. So I hit those buttons that say download. And if you go to the next screen, Jason, everybody will see what I get. So this is what happens when you hit download. You get this. Now what I do is I turn this into the next page. All right, so on the left side, you see 5 years of data. And then to the right, you see all the different models that I'm creating. So this is the CDC's data on mortality for both influenza and COVID. And what I do then is create models or charts based on the data, showing what the deaths were by year for each affliction. Okay, so that's how I get what I'm about to show you. So if you go to the next slide, Jason. So when I show you these dashboards and I show you these pie charts and I show you these bar charts, go to the next slide. The charts are the data. They're coming from the same spreadsheet. So I'm just downloading from the CDC, highlighting the data I want to chart and creating the charts on that same spreadsheet. So when I show you guys pie charts, what I'm really showing you is the CDC's data. Okay, is that clear to everybody? Any questions on that? Mm-hmm. Okay, let's go to the next slide. This is the age breakdown of coronavirus deaths in the United States. Five to 18 is school-age children. If we zoom into the wedge on school-age children, there's 262 school-age children that have died with coronavirus in the United States. We closed all the schools. That's 180 billion to reopen them. All right, so these are the things I notice. Let's go to the next slide. That's school-age children. In the United States, all 5 to 18-year-olds that have died with COVID versus everybody else. Now, we closed all the schools. We're vaccinating all the kids. More kids drown. Let's go to the next slide. In fact, if we look at from birth to 44 years old, 16,112 people have died. This is United States. Now, Fauci hasn't told you this. They closed all the schools. And just to put $180 billion in perspective, the Burj Khalifa, which is the tallest building in the world, cost $1.5 billion to build when they built it. That was Skidmore, Owens, and Merrill. $1.5 billion. We're spending $180 billion to reopen the schools. 256 kids died. So now if we look at everybody up to 44 years old, it's a very small portion of the population. On this slide, you're looking at everybody 65 and older and everybody younger than 65. And we're vaccinating the kids. Let's go back up 2 slides. That's school-age children, kindergarten to high school seniors. It's so thin you can barely see it. More kids drown than died from COVID-19. Why hasn't Fauci or Dr. Walensky said anything about this? Let's go to the next slide. Keep going. All right, let's zoom in on this one. All right, so this is the blue is 65 and older. Everyone younger than 65 is 20%. 80% of the deaths in the United States, if you go back up 1 slide, I break it out by percentages. And according to Apple spreadsheets and Apple Math, it's 80-20. So 80% of the people that died with coronavirus in the United States, these are deaths, not cases, deaths. Everything I'm showing you is deaths. 80% of the people that died were 65 and older. All right, so we also talked last time about comorbidities, and I showed you that influenza was the #1 comorbidity, despite the fact that Anthony Fauci told Brett Baer that there is no influenza and it was miraculous and there's none in Australia. So despite that, when you go down to the first line on that table, it says that comorbidity #1 is influenza with over 200,000 cases. And not cases, excuse me, deaths. So if there's 265,000 people that died with COVID and influenza, how does Dr. Fauci tell Brett Baer that there was no influenza? Looks to me like there's 264,995 dead people with influenza and COVID. Now, when we go to the 5%, 5% of the big number is how many people died just with SARS-CoV-2. But I started to wonder, okay, what about other causes of death? So we see that it's taking a toll on the older population. What about other causes? So this is called a balanced scorecard, and it came from Harvard, kind of invented this concept where the only variable is age. Everything else is identical. So we're looking at different age groups. And what we're asking now, or what this is telling us, is COVID deaths made up how many of the overall deaths, total deaths for that age group. So amongst the youngest people, it's a tiny, tiny, tiny slice. As we get into that middle tier, COVID deaths are coming up to 10%. But the green is deaths from all other causes: Alzheimer's, heart attacks, murders, etc. So the blue is COVID deaths, the green is deaths from all other causes. So how big a problem is COVID? We go to the next screen. And that's by age. So now if you zoom in, for example, 5 to 14, 1 to 4, right? You've got 37 kids, 1 to 4, that have died with COVID. And then you go scroll down a little bit so they can see what the green is. Almost 5,000 kids have died from other stuff. So how big a problem is COVID? Same thing with school age kids. 5 to 14, if there's only 112 kids that have died with COVID, and more kids are drowning in pools and beaches, so 7,800 kids of this age died. 112 of them died with COVID. And this continues, this notion, regardless of age group. What's that age group on the right? Scroll up a little bit. 15 to 24. So these are high school and college age kids. About 962 died with COVID, but 50,000 died from other stuff. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Even when we get into the older population, 75 to 84, COVID deaths are not dominating. It's not the predominant cause of death, not even close. Let's go to the next slide. Coronary heart disease, Alzheimer's, stroke, hypertension, diabetes, kidney disease, right? So these are the things that tend to kill people. You know, these are the actual statistics. 40,000 people a year fall down and die. 40,000 fall down and die. All right. So these are the different causes of death other than coronavirus. And when we look at coronavirus compared to all these other causes of death, it's not the lion's share. All right, let's go to the next slide because it's going to stun you guys. Going back to the data at the CDC, what we're now going to look at, I exported this. Let's go to the next slide. All right, this is sex. This is chromosomes by age. Different age groups, starting upper left with the youngest. And as we go down, we get to older and older. And the only thing I've changed here is male or female. So the question is, are women dying twice as much as men? Or are men dying twice as much as women? And is this not important? How is this not important? This is a 2-to-1 ratio in just about every age group. Twice as many men have died with coronavirus as women. Fauci hasn't told you this. This is a fact. This is straight from the CDC. This is not interpreted. I want you guys to take this in for a minute. Twice as many men have been dying as women in every age group. Okay. All right. Now we go to a different system at the CDC. This is the system where they now track COVID-19 deaths. I'm here.
Hello?
You lose me?
Hello?
We have you,
Oh,
John.
somebody-
Somebody needs to be on mute.
Yep, there we go. He's muted. Okay, so I go to a different system at the CDC to just get linear by-week coronavirus deaths next to influenza deaths. So as much as they told us not to conflate the two, the CDC decided to conflate the two in the same system. So now I have all the COVID-19 deaths by week right next to all of the influenza deaths by week. And what I've done on the next slide, you're going to see 5 years of influenza deaths. Now, on the left-hand side of the chart, there's a peak that says 80,000 deaths. Dr. Fauci told us that in 2017, 2018, had one of the worst seasons ever, and 80,000 people died. That's it, that peak. So what the hell is this thing on the right? That's influenza. There's no coronavirus on this chart. None. Zero coronavirus. This is all influenza PNI. Dr.
And John,
Fauci
just to remind the viewers, PNI stands for pneumonia and influenza. It's an industry standard term for referring to that.
Correct. And when Dr. Fauci said we had 80,000 die in the 2017-2018 season, he's talking about PNI. So that 80,000 number that he gave us at that peak over there on the left-hand side of that chart, that's PNI deaths. And what PNI is they combine pneumonia and influenza deaths, and they call it PNI. And they've been doing this for years on death certificates. So this is the data for the past 5 years in the United States. Dr. Fauci tells us 80,000 people died of influenza back at that peak on the left. And this is taking you right to present day. So the question is, if that peak on the left is 80,000, what the heck is this Mount Everest triple peak thing on the right? Now, I'm going to show you COVID in a second. We're going to add COVID to the picture. But before we conflate the two, right, we have to say, well, okay, well, that was influenza. So the question we asked last time I gave testimony was, when COVID arrived, did influenza just disappear? Well, it appeared that way to the physicians because PCR tests don't test for every single strain of influenza. They certainly don't test for the gain of function strains that they work with in the labs. So that's not in the PCR test. So they won't find it. But the coroners tend to do cultures because it takes a couple days, but the coroners aren't in a rush. So we go to the next slide, and the answer is in the coroner's mortality system. And the coroner's mortality system says, no, there's a massive influenza outbreak as people were dying with COVID. Two things at the same time, according to the coroners at the CDC, at the CDC system. Two different afflictions, same time. Now we go to the next screen. When we start to really study it very closely, and we start to take into consideration the comorbidities, and we start to look at the curve, go to the next slide. Okay, we flip it. There we go. This is the past 12 weeks in the United States. For the past 12 weeks in the United States, influenza deaths have been outnumbering COVID deaths. 12 weeks is 3 months. Influenza deaths have been outnumbering COVID deaths in the United States for the past 3 months. Nobody has said a thing. Is that not Dr. Fauci's responsibility? Does Dr. Walensky not bear any responsibility for this? This is 3 months of data. There's not a single week on this chart where COVID deaths exceed influenza deaths. Not one. This is from week 10 to week 22, which is now. It's the most recent data. I pulled this today. Let's go to the next slide. There has been a lot of questions about the suppression of certain therapeutic treatments. In some countries, they were using therapeutic treatments before there were vaccines, or they were attempting to. And there was a lot of hullabaloo and a lot of censorship about two particular therapeutic drugs. And a lot of doctors were wondering, why does this keep happening? Why are they censoring the efficacy of particular therapeutics? This seems weird. Well, I found some wording in the FDA's document, or their documentation, which led to some further wording. So let's take a look at that. But the net of it is, it says that you're only going to get an emergency use authorization for a vaccine if there's no available and approved therapeutic. So if the therapeutic got green lighted, the vaccines do not get emergency use authorization. As of today, according to Pfizer's website, the first line, the first sentence at the Pfizer website about their vaccine, the facts about the Pfizer vaccine, the first sentence says, can we zoom in on that, Jason? That first sentence. The Pfizer BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine has not been approved or licensed by the US Food and Drug Administration, but has been authorized for emergency use by FDA under an emergency use authorization to prevent coronavirus disease for use in individuals 12 years of age and older. Okay, we go to the next screen and we see the same wording at Moderna. So Moderna tells us the same thing. The Moderna vaccine has not been approved or licensed by the US Food and Drug Administration, but has been authorized for emergency use by the FDA. So I wanted to look more into this emergency use authorization wording. So we go to the next slide. And this is where, Larry, we're going to have some fun. US Code, Title 21, Chapter 9, Subchapter 5, Part E, 360 BBB3, authorization for medical products for use in emergencies. Uh-oh. Let's go to the next slide. What does that say? That there's no adequate, approved, and available alternative to the product for diagnosing, preventing, or treating such disease or condition. This is in order for there to be an emergency use authorization granted, there cannot be an effective, approved alternative treatment. Well, the problem here is, go to the next slide. That's more of the same. On October 22nd, remdesivir was approved as a therapeutic treatment. Once that happened, the US code authorization for products says that there's no adequate, approved, and available alternative. The vaccines were given EUA authorization after October 22nd, meaning remdesivir had already been approved. So if remdesivir is approved as a therapeutic, now this is full FDA approval. This is not emergency use. This is full FDA approval. On October 22nd, the vaccines don't come out till much later, in violation of US Code 21. I believe. I could be wrong, but that's for the jury to decide. But this particular US code, Title 21, Chapter 9, Subchapter 5, Part E, addresses the authorization for medical products for use in emergencies. Now, if today less than 100, well, put it this way, if today fewer people die from coronavirus than from simply falling down and dying, are we still in a medical emergency? We know 40,000 a year fall down and die. If fewer than that are dying now, are we still in a medical emergency? Because if we're not, the emergency use authorization is supposed to be rescinded according to the code. Does the medical emergency still exist? We'll have to check with the jury. Recipe for Destruction was an op-ed piece written by Ray Kurzweil, who's a Google fellow, and Bill Joy, who is the founder of Sun Microcomputers and now is a partner at Kleiner Perkins, Caulfield and Byers, and he's a billionaire in Silicon Valley. 2005, they wrote this article criticizing the work that Dr. Fauci, Dr. Taubenberger, and Dr. Kawaoka were doing, which was effectively recreating and reconstructing the 1918 Spanish flu, but then publishing the genome on the GenBank database, meaning it was in the public domain and anybody could use it. Ray Kurzweil and Bill Joy come out vociferously against it. So this is crazy. What are you guys doing? But Fauci funds it, and the NIH goes ahead with it anyway. Dr. Taubenberger, Jeffrey Taubenberger, reconstructs the 1918 Spanish flu. This is what Jon Stewart was talking about on the Colbert Show the other night. The guy who did it is Taubenberger. Another doctor named Kawaoka, who I think is on the next page. Kawaoka is probably on the next page. Yep. So Kawaoka at the University of Wisconsin takes the H1N1 gene, H1N1 virus, starts doing gain of function to create a version of the Spanish flu that human beings can't recover from. So if there's 274,000 people that died with influenza last season, and over 290,000 that have died this season, let's jump ahead a couple slides, Jason, until we get to the flu burden thing from Twitter, because that's kind of the punchline. There you go. Madison Square Garden. CDC says 22,000 people died. Their mortality system says 274,000 people died. I'm pretty good with numbers, math, charts, spreadsheets. I cannot figure how you get from the 274 to the 22. How do you get to 22,000 from 274? So go down, go down the other way, normal way. We get to flu burden. And the CDC came up with this notion of influenza burden, which is this complex formula of extrapolating the hospitalization rate to the reported rate, and we do an adjusted rate. But you see at the top of the pyramid, it says how many people died. That's the number I keep looking at. That number is 274,000. When they tell you influenza burden is 22,000, it's not just this pyramid they're using. Let's go to the next slide. It's all of this. And the next slide. Oh, there's more. You thought that was complicated? No. Now, okay. So when they tell you influenza burden is 22,000, they're starting with the 274,000 number and then doing this. And I'm pretty good at math. And up. Look at that formula, Jason. Let's zoom in on that formula. Above the triangle, up. That is influenza burden. So when they tell you, when Fauci says 80,000 people died in 2017-18, he's talking about this, not what the system says. He's talking about this. 274,000 people died last season, but the CDC tells you it's 22,000. There's 293,000 dead this season. And nobody's telling you that more people have died from influenza than from coronavirus for the last 12 weeks in the United States. And with that, my testimony is complete.
Well, this is very, very important, John, because, it is a crime for the American citizen to lie to the government. It is 28 U.S.C. 1001. You get 10 years for every lie. But under our law, there's no crime for the government to lie to the people, the law of man. But we're going under the law of nature, and nature's God, as it says in our Declaration of Independence. So therefore, as far as we're concerned, it's a crime to lie to the American people. And lying also includes withholding material information, which has then caused the United States and others around the world to be administering vaccines that, at least short-term, medium-term, or long-term, are likely detrimental to the health of our people and are being foisted upon us. We're being discriminated against because of that. So we will add a count to the complaint in this regard as well. And we'll be going back and scouring congressional records to see if, in fact, Fauci did also lie under oath or withhold material information with regard to this as well, with regard to the various statements that were made. But this is crucial. And it's another example, and this is the segue to not just the citizens' grand jury, but why we are putting out a call to legal and peaceful arms to join our Third Continental Congress in Philadelphia on July 5th and 6th. It's going to be covered by major networks, live streamed by Jason Goodman, Crowdsource the Truth. Be also up on freedomwatchusa.org. You're going to be a very important speaker there, one of our delegates. We have people coming either in person or through Zoom throughout the country representing the American people. And we need to rise up, and we need to not just take this country back, because it has been taken away from us, but we need to reestablish a legal system that addresses the wrongs that have been perpetrated against the people. And that's the purpose of the citizens' grand jury. So I want to thank you, and I want people to go to freedomwatchusa.org, sign up. If you're a student or you're a military veteran, you'll get in for free. If not, we ask that you buy a ticket unless you have extenuating circumstances. And, we're going to give away, it's going to be like going to a baseball game to some extent, but much more important than going to a baseball game. You'll get a t-shirt, a lapel pin, and my book. I'll sign it for you. It takes a revolution. So you'll be able to ponder, what you've observed, but it's going to be historic. It is historic. We're starting at ground level, a situation where we are going to reclaim the country. And we better do it fast, because it's all but lost. We can see just in the last few days with the pathetic performance of our president, if you want to call him that, in front of Vladimir Putin, where Putin humiliated him and said, "What are you calling me a killer?" When in fact, you have your FBI and your Justice Department being used as a Gestapo to run people down who simply came to Washington to protest. He says, those in glass houses should not throw stones. I'm paraphrasing. When you hear that from a despot, a tyrant like Putin, then you can understand that we've got the same kinds of people, in some respects, in charge of us right now. We cannot allow that to happen. So we must rise up peacefully and legally, and we must again declare independence, move forward, and reestablish the vision and creation of our founding fathers. So go to freedomwatchusa.org and sign up and participate in our Third Continental Congress, our 245th anniversary of our first Declaration of Independence. And we will be engaging in a discussion among all those that are there and those who even aren't there to see what we need to do to take the country back from the despots and tyrants who now seek to control our lives, our health, our welfare, and our economic well-being. So thank you all. Jason, you're going to be sending the Ilham Omar complaints to our citizen grand jurors and also our preliminary findings with regard to the indictment of Fauci. Please return them to us at your earliest convenience before next Thursday. Thank you.
And Larry, before we go, I want to remind everybody that they can purchase the book, It Takes a Revolution, Forget the Scandal Industry, from Amazon.com or anywhere that books are sold. Financial contributions to Judicial Watch, Freedom Watch. My apologies. Everybody knows that Larry was also the founder of Judicial Watch. FreedomWatchUSA.org is where people want to go. Your financial contributions are tax deductible, and contributions over $50, you're going to get a gift book, the copy of It Takes a Revolution, Forget the Scandal Industry. I want to thank our citizens grand jurors, and I want to thank John Cullen for his amazing expert testimony. We're looking forward to seeing everyone in Philadelphia on July 5th and 6th. And thanks everyone for watching. I want to remind viewers you can support Crowdsource the Truth by going to subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. We'll be back next week with another session of the Citizens Grand Jury. Thanks to everyone for participating. Have a great day.
God bless you all.